If you've been a long-time subscriber of the channel, you'll know that I use text quite a lot. The text I use on pretty much all my videos is a font that I came up with myself. But I'm no experienced designer with a font of my own, so all the text in my tutorials was painstakingly drawn by hand. Until now. Recently I went exploring into the world of typography, as I've always had an interest in fonts. And upon investigating this strange new hobby, I found out how incredibly easy it is to make your own typable fonts. In fact, I believe it's so easy that you, watching, can have your own custom font exported and in your program of choice by the end of today. Or, if you're really fast, by the end of this video. Welcome to a typography tutorial. Type vocabulary. Let's begin by defining some of the key terms associated with typography. The word typeface refers to the individual design of the characters, while the word font describes the weight, styling, and format of the letters. I've linked an article in the description that explains this much better than I can. A serif is a short line at the ends of a character, and sans serif can describe fonts without these serifs. Tracking refers to the spacing between all letters in a selection, while kerning describes the spacing between two side-by-side characters. The baseline is the line that most letters rest on, and the cap height is the height of the capital letters. The lowercase letters fit between the baseline and the X height. Descenders and ascenders tell if the letter goes above or below these limitations. There are heaps of terms that describe the individual features of these characters. So now you understand some of the basic principles, let's get designing. I think the best way to go about creating a pixel art font is to design it first in a pixel related editor. This way you can focus on the design of the letters to start with. Once we have the design, we can convert the characters into vectors and export them as a font file. Another thing to consider before we start is character height. Remembering what we learned in the canvas sizing video, we know that pixel lettering should be quite small. In this case, most of my simple fonts will be no more than 8 pixels tall. Line method. This is the method I like to call the line method, and it's probably the most intuitive. The basic concept is to use the pen tool to create characters similar to how you would draw them by hand, only more geometric as they are contained within a grid. For the letter A, you can see me drawing each of the lines that make up an A, staying inside the height limitations. This process is continued for all the letters until you have a full alphabet. You can use this same approach for rounder fonts too, like this one called generic. The most important thing to keep in mind when using the line method is that your font will end up being fairly light depending on the size. Of course, you can double the line thickness as well. Box method. For bolder fonts, another approach is to start with filled in boxes. This is what I'm calling the box method. The first step is to choose how wide each character will be. For most fonts, the widths will vary. For example, a W will be quite wider than an E. Once you have all the letters of the alphabet sketched out in individual boxes, you can start to eliminate pixels to create characters. Hand draw method. This method, the hand draw method, is very similar to how it sounds. The premise is to freehand some letters and then go back and fix up some mistakes. This method is quite useful for cursive fonts, but not so much geometric fonts. Some advice with this method would be to add a new layer behind the working space that contains a rough rectangle to guide you. If your heights aren't consistent, when converted to a font, it will look quite jumbled up. Oversize and refine method. The oversize and refine method is something that I came up with for larger fonts. The basic principle is to get a smaller font, such as a 5 or 7 pixel tall one, and upscale it, so each pixel becomes a 2x2 square of smaller ones. Now we have it in a larger size, some of the limitations we faced before can now be overcome. Where diagonal lines were only possible with 2 connecting pixels before, now we can place smaller pixels around these squares to get a higher res letter. Once we have our shape, we can begin making some more interesting fonts with color and detail, such as this metallic one I made for the Parallax video. Just keep in mind the information about canvas sizing, because it's very easy to go into the uncanny valley with this method. Styling. But what if we want a bold version? Well, there are some easy ways to do that. The first is using the line method with the 2 pixel wide brush. However, this is quite difficult with the height restrictions. The second is to copy your drawn font and add pixels to either side, which I found works the best. The last option is to create a regular font with the line method and then make the bold version of the font with the box method, as this lends itself to thicker lines. For italics, you can either let your program of choice warp the pixels, or if you're not a fan of that, you can select rows of pixels and shift them across to the right. Exporting your font. So, we've designed our font and now we want it to be a proper font file. Well, the first step is to vectorize the letters. Right now, our letters are in a raster or bitmap format. This means they're built up from a number of pixels in a grid. And our letters are quite low in resolution, as they are made up of very few pixels. What we want is a vector image, which is an image described by paths and shapes. This way, when we scale the font up or down, it will never lose resolution. For vector illustrations, the best software is usually Adobe Illustrator, but Adobe is quite expensive. A free alternative is Inkscape, which does pretty much the same thing. For this project, we aren't actually doing anything incredibly advanced, so Inkscape can work just fine. Now you can see that I've set up a grid in Illustrator to replicate pixel art. Importing an image from my pixel editor, all I need to do is replicate the letters in vector shapes. To do this, you can use the Live Paint tool or just create direct shapes with rectangles and the pen tool. This method works quite well for the smaller fonts, but for something a little bigger, this process can be incredibly tedious. Alternatively, we can use a feature called Image Trace, which automatically converts an image into vector paths. Later in the process of making fonts, I found an even better way than Image Trace. The problem with Image Trace is it doesn't know we've shown it pixel art and it tries to trace the PNG we've given it. This can lead to unwanted artifacts and general roughness. Instead, when importing the image, you can go to Object, Create Object Mosaic. If you match the number of squares with the dimensions of the pixel art, the end result will be clean, sharp, vectorized pixel art. Sometimes Illustrator can have a hard time with larger image files, so just keep that in mind. Once we have our fonts in vector format, make sure you group each letter together with the Unite feature. In Illustrator, you can press Ctrl+4 to repeat the last Pathfinder command, which comes in handy when grouping lots of characters. Now, there are a couple ways to make these into font files. The first is a free program called FontForge. FontForge requires you to have all the letters individually exported into their own SVG files, which can be quite time consuming. Then, you import them into the software, and a trick I learned is to double click on the letter, press Ctrl+Shift+I, type the letter in and press enter. Ctrl+Shift+I is the command to import files, and this speeds the process up quite a bit. FontForge is great for a free program, but if you want to take your fonts to the next level, I highly recommend an Illustrator plugin called FontSelf. FontSelf makes the entire process heaps easier, but for $50 it's on the expensive side. I got a student discount for $35, but even then I'd only recommend getting it if you want to make multiple fonts in the future. The really great thing about this software is how convenient it is. Located within Illustrator itself, you can select the letters A to Z and a single button will automatically sort them into their individual letters. Very handy. Another really useful tool is the kerning and spacing options. FontSelf has an option called Smart Kerning, which automatically calculates the letter spacing for you. When you're happy with your font, go to Save with FontSelf or Generate Fonts with FontForge. Now you have your OTF or TTF files, you can go ahead and press the Install button. It's as easy as that. You've now got your own custom font installed on your computer, ready for all your favorite programs. And yes, MS Paint lovers, it does work in Paint too. My own fonts. Like I said at the start, I created some pixel art fonts of my own. I started off with some basic fonts for paragraph or large text use. Then I moved on to some more interesting fonts, such as this metallic font from my Parallax video. I made another font called Petroloid for steampunk projects, and a Space Runner font for retro applications. But the font I had the most fun making has got to be Wongdong's, my own version of Microsoft's WebDings. I ended up making about 30 font files, which might explain to some of my subscribers why there hasn't been a video in quite a while. I uploaded all the fonts to itch.io, where I put most of my usable assets from my videos. I've created 2 font packs, one basic pack for free, and a premium pack that costs $1. Now I completely understand why you wouldn't want to pay some random guy on the internet for his fonts, when there are tons of fonts out there for free already. I really just wanted to see if anyone would pay anything for my art, and so far I didn't think any of my parallax or time lapse were worth anything. Either way, you can still download the basic pack for free and use it wherever you want. All the fonts are vector, so you can scale them up or down and they won't lose resolution. I still have heaps to learn, especially with kerning, but all in all it was a pretty fun experience. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing some of your own custom fonts. Go out there and make some funky fonts. Tag me on Instagram if you make any you're really happy with.